Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. This 30-minute podcast features a new author interviewed by me every single day, 365 days a year, for about 30 minutes. I am also the publisher for Zibby Books, which publishes 12 books a year in fiction and memoir. Our books are already out now. You can check it out on zibbybooks.com. And we have a magazine called Zibby Mag, where we have lots of wonderful essays and lifestyle features. That's at zibbymag.com. We have classes at zibbyclasses.com. And I recently opened a bookstore in LA called Zibby's Bookshop at 1113 Montana Avenue at 11th Street in Santa Monica. I hope that you are able to enjoy some of our other offerings. But this here podcast is the basis of all of it and started in 2018. And no matter what I do, this is basically my favorite thing. Enjoy. Gary Gulman is the author of Misfit, Growing Up Awkward in the 1980s. Over 25 years in comedy, Gary Gulman has established himself as an eminent performer and peerless writer. A product of Boston, Gulman has been a scholarship college football player, an accountant, and a high school teacher. He has made countless television appearances as both a comedian and an actor. Gulman has made 4 masterful TV specials, including his most recent, universally acclaimed stand-up special for HBO, The Great Depression, a tour de force look at mental illness, which is equal parts hilarious and inspiring. In 2019, he appeared in the international blockbuster Joker. He can most recently be seen co-starring with Amy Schumer in the hit Hulu comedy series Life and Beth. Gary's first book is titled Misfit, Growing Up Awkward in the 1980s, a memoir based on his life from kindergarten through 12th grade. Amy Schumer, by the way, called the book laugh out loud funny and heartfelt, and MacArthur Fellowship recipient Adrienne Nicole LeBlanc found it exquisite, love-affirming, and generous. Today, Gulman is one of the most popular touring comics selling out theaters around the country, including the prestigious Carnegie Hall in New York City. Gary's upcoming tour for Misfit will feature material based on his book, but not a repeat of the book. Gary lives in Harlem with his wife. Welcome, Gary. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss Misfit, Growing Up Awkward in the 1980s.
It is a pleasure. Thank you. I love talking books in general, and my book in particular.
Well, today's your lucky day because that's all you have to do. I loved this title so much. I grew up in the 1980s. I'm 47, but
oh wow,
I was just like, how many cultural references am I going to get? How much do I feel like I'm living here? And I feel like such nostalgia and warm feelings about the 80s. So it put me off in a good mood starting the book. And then, of course, then there was the book.
Makes me really happy. I'm glad.
So I want you to explain to listeners what the book is about, but you use this very interesting device where you're going back and forward in time and even choosing different fonts and showing us the depth of sort of despair contrasted with moments of time from your upbringing. Tell listeners, why did you do it this way? Why did you decide to write the book? And yeah, just your life in general. Go ahead.
Initially, I wanted to write a book. I've read several times, and I forget who's given credit for saying this, but write the book you would want to read. And I always thought it would have been great to have read a book when I was growing up and later about people who didn't fit in, and wherever they were either marginalized or bullied or left out. So I was very athletic, but I didn't really feel comfortable around the kids who were jocks. And I was a good student, but I never really felt accepted by the really smart kids in class. And then I repeated the first grade. So when I went to first grade again, I was much bigger and more mature than those kids. So I didn't fit in there. And then in Hebrew school, which I covered some in the book, I felt I wasn't as religious or as well off as a lot of the kids in Hebrew school. So it was just time after time I was left out or marginalized, in some cases bullied. And so I wanted to give people who were misfits growing up, and also look back on that and say, oh, I understand and I get it. And also give some people some hope that eventually you will find your group and you will find friends. And I found a spouse and things worked out well for me. The book is set up, it was originally called K through 12. So it's a memoir of kindergarten through 12th grade. Now, the reason I was thinking about all these things so extensively was that when I was 46 years old, I had what would be called a major depressive episode in which I was hospitalized and received electroconvulsive therapy treatments. And I was sort of in a very difficult position in that I didn't know whether I was going to be able to work as a comedian anymore. And my lease was up, so I didn't have the energy to look for a new apartment. So I moved back to the home I grew up in the 70s and 80s with my mom. And I happened to intersect with a lot of events and people that I had grown up with. And so this is why I had such an extensive time remembering and pining for a simpler time, but also remembering certain aspects of that simpler time, which that made me who I am, for better and for worse. So that was sort of the impetus for collecting all these stories. And so in between each chapter from my childhood and early adolescence, I reflect on this time when I was 46 and 47 living at my mom's house. And so that's usually the jumping off point for each chapter.
I love how you say that a lot of, addicts or people recovering hit bottom, and, hitting bottom for you could not go any lower than being back with your mom in your childhood home.
I had been in the psych ward, which a lot of people would say, well, that is your bottom. No, my bottom was moving back into the twin bed I had grown up in at my mom's house.
And you're 6'5" too. I'm surprised you even fit in your bed, right? Aren't you 6'5"? Isn't that what you said?
I had to sleep at an angle, and sometimes my girlfriend at the time, now wife, she would visit, and we would have to use the Pythagorean theorem to arrange ourselves on that bed. But I usually got the hypotenuse, so I felt pretty good.
That's great. Geometry made cool.
That's chapter 10th, I believe.
Yeah. I hate to laugh and make this seem light, because so much of the book was really a period of significant despair and hopelessness. And, you talk about, suicidal ideation and a lot of really heavy themes in here. There was one passage. Can I read this? Do you mind if I read a little bit?
No, I love to hear my voice.
Okay. Here I go then. You can just, when this comes out, you can just put it on repeat or whatever. But anyway, this is just one from August 2017. I wake up and check my iPhone 7. It's turning off and on and won't hold a charge. I don't know why this happens. This happens to my phone right now. But anyway, I'm distraught. Phone trouble, computer crashes, tax returns, and insurance claims are all features of a gauntlet of quotidian stressors that in my fragile state can sabotage the momentum of being awake and send me back for more of that sweet, sweet oblivion. I owe thousands of dollars in taxes that are months overdue. I have tens of thousands of dollars in denied insurance claims from my psych ward stay, and now the phone is dead. I'll need to spend more money than I can't afford to get a new one. I have to make a trip to the North Shore Mall. When I'm sick, it's painful to interact with people at stores. I feel dumb and dependent and meek. I'm also afraid of running into people I know. They'll ask me how I'm doing or what I've been up to, and I'll either have to lie or tell them better. I feel safe around shoelaces again, and you should see all the kitchen knives they leave out. I'm sleeping in a twin bed at my mommy's house, but things are looking up. I park on the same side where my mom used to park where she worked at Murray's, blah, blah, blah. I'm anxious and self-conscious about my disheveled appearance, shorts with holes in them, wrinkled, ragged, Bob Dylan t-shirt. But I'm also thinking back wistfully about how at one time, when I was only 8, I was a star here, the prince of what was then called the North Shore Shopping Center. Oh my gosh. How'd I do? Okay.
Thank you. It's interesting because I have two feelings. One is, oh my gosh, how did I ever survive that horrific time period? I was so anxious and just so depressed. And then I think, wow, not only did I get out of it, I was able to discipline myself for over 2.5 years to write it all down. And it doesn't, some things you see or hear that you created, you cringe, and that didn't sound so bad. So I'm very grateful that I was able to pull that off. But yeah, I was going to places that I had gone to as a child, but as an adult, and it was nostalgic, and I would get wistful, but also I would yearn for that innocent time when, yes, there's a whole many paragraphs about how popular I was with the people who worked at the mall. My mom would let me loose at the mall while she worked at this Hallmark store, greeting cards and stationery store at the mall. And I it was weird because I fit in there better than I did at school. I was only 8 years old, but the teenagers and some of the empty nest moms who worked with my mom, they just adored me. So it was this wonderful place that I was accepted and almost like I was a mascot.
Well, I think, it really speaks to the collective childhood, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And we just all imagine ourselves to be something great or something interesting or whatever. And no one ever thinks like, well, I'm going to come back and I'm going to be more upset than I am right now as a child, right? And so you have to sort of like come face to face with that. Not that you aren't successful. You're obviously quite successful in your ways, but I mean, from an emotional standpoint, even.
Sure. No, that's a great point. And I think that part of the good thing of moving back home was that there were people who were, two of my friends had bought their mom's house in our neighborhood. So I was able to visit with them, and that was very helpful. Sometimes we would just sit and watch basketball games, but other times we would go for walks. Or one friend had a landscaping company, and I remember helping him out with clearing leaves and brush and things like that. So it was very therapeutic to be back there, but also it was a reminder of yes, longing to escape and then finding yourself back where it all started.
Well, not to dwell on the sad parts, but I was really drawn to the story of you overcoming all of that. So when we enter the story, you're basically a mess and are having trouble even getting to your therapist, which was another heartbreaking scene, right? You can't even like get the minimum help that you need. But what happened from a depressive episode standpoint before that? Had you had smaller depressive episodes? Did this come out of nowhere? How did this come into your life?
Oh no, that's a great question that nobody has really asked me. But since I was 7, I would have these episodes, and they were frequently associated with stressors in school or in sports. And I would have 2 or 3 months where I was unproductive, and I would say I was dragging myself through life. So things were much more difficult than they had to be. And then at about 45 and a half, I started this episode that I kept thinking, well, I usually come out of these after 3 months, and it kept going, and the medicines that I had used were not helpful. And then about a year and a half or almost 2 years into it, my psychiatrist said, why don't we admit you to the hospital and we'll take care of you. And that sort of started my recovery. And it took a lot longer than that to actually be myself, what I would consider my best self, which is I can be quite charming and happy and active and productive. And so from about the year and a half to 2.5 years, so I guess it was, I moved back into my mom's in June, and about October of that year, so about 2.5 years into this episode, which is, 8 times longer than they usually lasted, I felt myself. And I'll tell you, since then, I've been so healthy and also so grateful that I've gone out of my way to try and share this story and make people who are in the thick of it see some hope, and also know that they're not alone, that there are other people who go through this. And I guess I never thought I was a person that people would say, oh, how can he be depressed? He has a lot going for him. But it turns out that a lot of people feel some comfort in knowing that this was very helpful to me, knowing that achievement or notoriety was not going to make me feel better about myself, that it was chemical and biological, and I couldn't achieve my way out of my feelings. I needed to get my biology straight, and there was no shame in not feeling great just because you had done some good things. So that was very helpful to me, and I'm very happy I'm able to pass that information along.
It's great. It will be so helpful. It's just like any other disease, right? You don't.
Right. No, exactly.
Your mind, you're in this whole bad loop where beat yourself up for feeling bad.
Exactly. Most of the diseases don't come with that aspect where you blame yourself and beat yourself up for feeling that way.
Yeah. Or question if it's a disease or if you're just like having a hard
Yes.
time or,
It's all in my head. And I brought this on myself. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually am on the board of an organization called the Child Mind Institute, and they're working on finding like a biomarker in kids that you can tell early on if you're prone to getting all of these things, and to be on the lookout, and then working on treatments for that. And so I find that really exciting.
And have they found a biomarker for it?
They're working on it.
Okay.
And they have like this whole open source platform with they've opened up the data. So everybody from all these different universities and organizations are working together to find what this is and how to, help kids from a young age and set more people up for success.
Amazing. Because I think just a diagnosis or an understanding from people back then would have been so helpful in not blaming myself and also treating it before it became so problematic.
Yes, true. Okay, the comedy side. So while you're going through these periods, you're also building a stand-up career. And even post this, coming out with the Great Depression, all of this stuff, turning all of your experience into something that people relate to and being able to perform. So how did you kind of navigate that, like in the midst of everything and even before? Like, this doesn't seem like a natural job from how you describe your childhood necessarily.
Right. But I do think I made it clear in the book, throughout my childhood, I did find so much comfort in solace in laughing with my family and friends and also making them laugh. And I think I'm nearly certain that there is a boost of serotonin and dopamine when you participate in laughter and when you make other people laugh. It just feels really great. So I was sort of in some cases self-medicating. And then in my recovery, I found it very helpful to go to the comedy shows, to be around other people who knew me and also had similar interests to me. And then I would get on stage frequently, even when I was just in the early stages of my recovery. I would get on stage and I had to address the fact that I looked awful and that I frequently had just thrown on the cleanest clothes I could find. And I would say, well, I've been very depressed, and I would make jokes about having been in the hospital. I got recognized by a patient when I was in the hospital, and I told this story about how I got recognized. I would say, have you ever been recognized in the psych ward and from TV? And people would laugh, and I would tell the story, and it was helpful on so many levels. It was getting some feedback on my story that was very positive. People would say, "Oh, that I have a daughter, I have a friend, or I've suffered from depression." That was incredibly helpful. And what they don't tell you is that sharing your story is not something that will make you feel worse. It will make you feel better, and it will make others feel better. So I think it also helps to reduce the stigma and makes people feel less alone. It's just a winner on all fronts. And the other thing was that it was getting me to do the hardest thing at that time, which was to get out of the house and be amongst the living and get some of that. There's also serotonin in just being around people and relating. So that was immensely helpful. And so I built sort of a routine of getting up and walking my dogs, and then making breakfast for them, and then feeding myself, and then eventually leaving the house later on in the day and exercising, and then the day was always finished by going to this comedy club in Harvard Square called the Comedy Studio, and I would perform there. And it was really all part of my recovery routine.
So funny. I've never really heard of performing comedy as like an antidepressant, essentially, right? I mean, people look to self-medicate in a lot of not very productive ways, right? With drugs and drinking and, all these other things. But I mean, this is a pretty sanctioned, healthy way to do it.
Yeah, it was. And I don't think it has to be stand-up comedy that gets you out of the house, but that was especially rewarding because it also happened to be my vocation. But
Right.
I think that one of the things was that early on, I was very tied to how the audience reacted, and that would affect my mood. And that was
Mhm.
not good. And that was part of the reason why I was having such a difficult time, is that I didn't feel I was good enough as a comedian. And I was able to figure out a way in which I would say, you just have to get on stage, whether it goes well or it doesn't go well. The act of getting on stage is the success. That's the end point, and you don't have to judge yourself. And that was so freeing. And of course, once you're able to do that, then you're not self-conscious, and you can do your best work. But getting to that point was difficult for me. So I'm very grateful that the stars aligned, and the universe complied in my escape routine.
Oh my gosh. You wrote about your dad a lot in the book, especially as a young kid and your relationship with him and your brothers and all of that. And I saw in the acknowledgments when you said, dedicating it to him in heaven and all of that. How do you feel about having examined your relationship a little bit more with your dad, I'm assuming, than before you wrote the book, and how you feel about that now, and just any general thoughts about it?
Oh, that's a great question, because that was one thing that was so helpful with the book. And I mean, I'm very enthusiastic about journaling and writing memoir. So I always say, even if you just stick it in a drawer, keeping track of your biography is really helpful. And it was very helpful in bringing some of these ideas and events to my therapist every Tuesday at 1:30, and we would examine these things, and I was able to get perspective. But one thing that I didn't anticipate with my dad, I just really wanted to tell the stories in our relationship, was that he was a figure that was negative initially, especially at the beginning of one of the chapters. But he redeemed himself so beautifully, and I couldn't have planned it better. If I was writing a novel, he redeemed himself so beautifully and came through for me again and again. And so I think it was really helpful to see that, and also examine the just the nature of humanity, which is, we're a mixed bag. We do some wonderful things, we do some really messed up things. And so I think it's sort of that Walt Whitman, I contain multitudes. And not just I, but everybody I intersect with had some great points and some negative points. And we were all doing our best. And my mom was another really interesting, quirky character who served me overall just as a great mom. And yet there were points where I would say, oh man, she really messed up there. But as a whole, both my parents and my brothers were positive, and I'm really grateful for their influence on my life.
It's amazing. Well, this is great because, if you ever switch therapists, all you have to do is just hand them the book, and you could be like, read this first and like, let me know when you're all caught up, and then I'll come in.
So funny. That is really something I think about from time to time, because I think, what if I had to get a new therapist? It would take weeks to bring them up to speed, and that's so funny. I wonder if they would. I would probably have to reimburse them for the time they spent reading the backstory, but it would free me up.
That's right. I remember, I'm not in therapy right now, although I should be, but whatever. But I was writing all these personal essays, and I was like, why am I coming in here and just saying, like, let me just read you this? Like, now this is 10 minutes, 15 minutes. This is a waste. Like, can I just send these to you ahead of time?
Yeah,
Or can I come in later?
brilliant idea.
Anyway, didn't really work out. Anyway, so from a writing perspective, what advice would you have for aspiring authors and people who want to go into their own experience to write memoir?
I think it was very helpful to read a lot. And I think Stephen King, in a book called On Writing, which I would recommend, he says a good writer is a good reader, or maybe a great writer is a great reader. So you have to read a lot. And in particular, I did read a lot of writing books, and particularly a book called Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. And then a book by Mary Carr about memoir writing, and those were really helpful. And then there was this other book that a woman had compiled of Kurt Vonnegut's speeches or anytime he had talked about writing, and it's called Pity the Reader. And those three were really, really helpful. And so the only thing is that I found that at some point you're reading to avoid writing, and it's just another procrastination technique. So I had to say, all right, I'll read for an hour, but I have to then sit down at that point and write. And the most helpful routine that I was able to get to was this practice where I would say, okay, I will just write for 15 minutes. And if I don't feel like writing anymore, I will stop. And invariably I would keep going because I was giving myself a push through the hardest part, which is actually starting. So I would say, do that. And then if you can, write for at least 2 hours in the morning, more if you can, less if you must, but you build up endurance. And you can't start by saying, all right, I'm going to write 8 hours today. I don't know many people who can maintain that type of strenuous writing activity, but you can build up to longer than just an hour. But you can start with an hour, you can start with 15 minutes and then build up. And I would say also that sometimes it's you don't have the energy to create, but you do have the energy to revise or edit. And that can be something that you do later in the day, but find whatever routine works for you. And also know that your subconscious will do a lot of work while you're sleeping and while you're not writing, so that if you find a stumbling block that you're just not able to get over, I found it really helpful to sleep on it. And then I would go back to it the next day, and almost without exception, I would find a fix or at least make it better and get towards the end goal. So I would say that's my writing advice. And I think next time they say you have to figure out how to write every book on its own. But I think next time I will be able to write it a little bit quicker because I won't fall into some of the pitfalls. Because I noticed that it was really hard to skip one day. It was really easy to skip the second, third, fourth, and fifth day. So try not to skip a day, even if you're just opening up your computer and reading what you read yesterday. That I feel gets you into that habit of being a writer.
That is excellent advice. Kind of similar to the gym, right? It's like
yes.
you get out of the habit. It's so hard.
Exactly like the gym. The hardest one to skip is that first day, and then it gets progressively easier.
Yeah. All these tricks we have to play on ourselves.
Yeah.
It does. I know. You have to do it. Yeah. Amazing. Well, Gary, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your book.
This was a pleasure. Thank you. I admire your podcast, and it was a delight talking to you. So thank you so much for including me.
My pleasure. All right.
And reading my book. Thank you.
No, it was great. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Oh, that's great to hear. All right. Have a great day. Thanks again.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.